Hello, Rick here with a brief video looking at a Star Trek starship, its origin, fate and real-life namesakes. This time I thought we could look into the history of the USS Buran and vessels of its name from continuity across the shows and extra-canonical sources. The Buran name has been associated with space since 1974 with the VKK Space Orbiter program, also known as the Buran program. The name means blizzard in Russian and aimed to produce a space plane around the same time as the USA was running its own space shuttle program. While from the outside it looked very similar, not surprising considering they were designed for the same purpose really, their interiors and tech were a little more varied. The first orbiter plane was, naturally, termed a buran-class and named the Buran 11F351K. However, the Buran only ever completed one spaceflight, and an unmanned one at that, on the 15th of November 1988. With the dissolving of the Soviet Union in 1991, funding for the Buran project ended, and the whole thing came to a close. Its official end came in 1993, and on May the 12th, 2002, a collapse at the Baikonur Cosmodrome destroyed the space plane. In Star Trek, aside from there being a planet called Buran, we have the first Federation vessel of the name, the USS Buran. It was a Columbia-class starship. The Columbia-class itself is the not strictly canon overhaul to the NX class. Originally, the NX vessels, such as Enterprise, were pulled in from 2156 onwards to be overhauled and have a secondary hull added to house a new warp drive. Once the NX class had been upgraded, the fledgling Federation began to manufacture original Columbia-class starships, the first two of which were the Buran and the Shenglong, which continued the space plane naming convention. The USS Buran was launched in 2165, but was lost in combat with an unknown enemy at some time, presumed Romulans. This, however, is only mentioned in passing by a future captain of a USS Buran. Speaking of, the USS Buran NCC-1422 was launched in the early 23rd century as a Cardenas-class starship. The vessel was captained by Gabriel Lorca and took part during the Klingon War of 2256-57, and it was present at the Battle of the Binary Stars, surviving this conflict and mobilised in several more battles against the Klingon forces. In May of 2256 it took part in Operation Riposte, and not long after was destroyed over Pryor's World with all hands. Official records state that Captain Lorca scuttled the vessel in order to prevent Klingon capture and was the only direct survivor. Spoilers, but this is not the whole story. The next USS Buran we encounter is another canon one, the USS Buran NCC-57580. This was a Challenger-class vessel, and it made two appearances in TNG, both times as a wreck. You see, it was one of the vessels that engaged the Borg at Wolf 359, and out of the task force of 40 vessels, 39, including the Buran, were destroyed. Not much was known about its history except its class, of which two other vessels, the USS Armstrong NCC-57537 and the USS Kearsarge NCC-57566, with both surviving its destruction in late 2366. This Buran turned up again as one of the derelict hulks at the surplus depot Z-15 a year later in the Quailor sector. There is finally the USS Buran of Star Trek Online, launched in 2410. Which shares a similar profile to its 2256 counterpart. This was termed the Buran class, however, and the NX 96400 was the first of its line. Its silhouette and occupation as a dreadnought earned it the nickname the Battle Axe. This vessel seems to have had enough of its prior namesakes being blown up in combat, and has found its fangs, being rather geared towards combat and rapid target acquisition. Interestingly, it came with a strange piece of equipment that allowed it to create a localised ion storm with itself as the eye, as well as numerous other exotic particle generators that could be tied into the main deflector. Re-registered as NCC on its launch, it was under the command of Captain Thebev. an Andorian and constructed in Yard 39 in the Tellar sector. During Thepev's tour, she referenced that every Starfleet vessel named the Buran had been destroyed in combat, listing Romulans, Klingons, Borg and the Dominion. That last one suggests a second USS Buran of the 24th century following the Battle of Wolf 359, one that was lost to the Dominion. In a nice addition, Captain Thepev also expresses delight at the name's origin, meaning of a snowstorm, and feels it rather suitable that an Andorian be its first captain. So, given the mentions in memory-based content, this is an example of Star Trek actively addressing a recurring trait of the legacy of the vessel, that being every vessel named the Buran has been destroyed in combat, a far more noble but no less tragic end than the original Buran. Frequently throughout the name's history too, we see that spaceplanes have been a common factor in naming the vessels and their classes. The NX vessels of the 2150s were all named after the NASA shuttles, while the Columbia class itself, a shuttle, shared spaceplane names from other nations. Then we have the Challenger class vessels supporting the Buran name again, before it gets its own class namesake in Star Trek Online's timeline. Thanks for watching this short legacy video on the history and namesakes of the Buran. From what I could tell, there were no actual vessels or ships of the name historically, but it would not surprise me considering the name simply means snowstorm in Russian, and I can easily picture a vessel named that. So, until the next video, thanks again for watching. I've been Rick, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.